Welcome everybody to this event. We're going to talk about data integration. This whole time, this is one of the most important topics for data engineers and can also be one of the most annoying. But luckily, I finally have two people here who know this in and out. They're working on data integration, solving data integration. I actually been looking into Airbyte for some time now, because they on their website we have over 3,500 connectors to data sources, and also that people can create their own connectors. And so I was trying to get some of them here. So luckily today I have two people, and let's get them in and let's say hi. Hey John. Hey boss.
Hi.
Hey,
Hey guys. Yeah, thanks for being here. Thanks that we can do this event together.
Awesome. I'm excited.
yeah,
Yeah.
thanks for having us.
We're going to do a few hands-on demos. We're going to talk about data integration. For everybody who is here, if you have questions, put them in the chat. Doesn't matter if LinkedIn or YouTube, we're going to see the questions. We're going to answer them throughout the stream. So whenever you have something, drop it in and we're going to get to it. Yeah, guys, I think people are interested in who you are and what your responsibilities are. So it would be nice if you say a few words about yourself.
Great. Let me share a quick slide with our pictures and all that. So hi, everybody. My name is John Whitney. I'm the Chief Product Officer here at Airbyte. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you, Andreas. Thanks for having us on. I'm here with my colleague, Was, who is our founding solutions engineer. He leads our team.
Hey, all. Nice to meet you. Excited to be here. Yeah, been a 2.5 year journey so far at Airbyte, and super excited to talk about 1.0 and the stuff we've been cooking up these last couple months and years even.
Cool. Yeah. Guys, Airbyte. What problems is Airbyte solving? Can you maybe tell this? I think there are also a lot of beginners here. What is Airbyte solving? Can we start with that?
Yeah, I mean, that's always good to ground people. So I've got just a quick intro slide to Airbyte, if it's okay if I share that. So super simple. Airbyte moves data from the left of the screen to the right of the screen, from sources to destinations. So it looks really simple. Data integration, when you look at it this way, it's like, oh, this is easy. But obviously, I think for everybody on the audience, you all know that this is quite a bit more difficult than that. So I prepared a little meme for, I think, the world that everybody in this audience is living in right now. What problem Airbyte is solving. I think of it as solving three-dimensional whack-a-mole. So that's the kind of headline I put in here, where
Okay.
the first dimension is just people, data engineers are facing kind of an ever-growing number of data sources, data silos. More and more data is getting added all the time, different places. So that's kind of the geography of data, or the places to find data, is growing. That's dimension one. Dimension two is just the data in those sources, those silos, is getting even more complex. It's the speed at which the data changes, the structure of the data with GenAI coming on and adding unstructured data, structured data having to look inside unstructured data. It's just that complexity is exploding, right? So not only are you looking in more places, but the stuff you're looking at is more complex. And then the third dimension is that the sources, frequently they're from third parties, and those third parties will change the way you interact and you integrate with those sources all the time. They're frequently product companies. They do, like any product company, they'll change their API, and sometimes they have to make a breaking change. And so I think that adds a third dimension of complexity. So these these moles on the picture are going crazy, and so that's making everybody's life miserable. And then I think, and I'm sure we'll talk about this, Andreas, when we're talking, but we at Airbyte really believe in kind of a fourth dimension to this problem, which makes it really complex, which is that people will want to use tools, and they'll want to use tools to solve this problem and solve these three problems. But then sometimes the tools don't do it all. And then you add a fourth dimension, which is you've written your own pipelines in some language, typically Python or something like that. And so now maintaining your own code, not only does your tool have to solve these problems, but you have to solve these problems yourself. And so that just adds a fourth dimension. So that's actually really where we want to go.
I mean, this is a problem that I had before a ton. Like most of the time you don't have a tool, and you need to, like in the early days when I remember I had a problem, needed to connect to a data source. There is no connector, there's no nothing. You need to build it your own. And then, as you said, then somebody changes something, everything breaks, and you're back at starting from zero, right?
Exactly.
So that's cool. Yeah, basically, okay. So who would you say benefits the most from these? From this, just engineers or?
Yeah, so that's a great question too. I mean, I think that's something we see in companies. I actually prepared a little slide on this topic of what we see in our customer environments. So the persona is typically a data engineer in the beginning, as you were saying, right? Like you're kind of in the earlier days, you're just trying to integrate some sources and get probably some kind of report out to somebody in the business side. That's a pretty classic use case. More and more, we're seeing that that's becoming a problem in and of itself, and just like the product and program management of that exercise explodes, and especially in larger companies. And so people want to embrace self-serve, which means that suddenly data engineering needs to be done at a meta level by people, and then exposed in a simple way to people who aren't necessarily data engineers, but maybe more analysts. And so that's kind of, we've called that like the self-serve use case. And then I think just I mean, everybody's talking about this these days, and we truly see it in our customers. Now you have people who are not born in the data analyst or data engineering world, professionally born, I mean, but who are coming in and trying to build some kind of internal AI app at a larger company. And they have to get data from all the same places and more, and much more unstructured data. And they don't know the tools at all. They've never heard of the word connector. And so they're kind of stumbling onto this same problem. And more we see all three of these things happening in the same companies, just to make it kind of exponentially harder.
Is this, like, I think this fits here. Here's actually a question from someone in the audience, like someone from Sweden. I would like to know about the future of data engineer, or the future of data engineering, and about the job and responsibility as a data engineer. I think that fits really well to what you've just shown, right?
That is a great question. I mean, I think obviously every job has to evolve over time. And as technology trends move, what you do moves. The thing that I think is invariant here is that everybody needs data. In fact, I'd say, in a way, it's kind of the best, data engineer is kind of the best job to have right now, because as companies mature to the right on this use case or maturity slide, they need, I mean, we've tried to draw it as the pictures on the bottom of like kind of the types and volume and number of sources and all that as exploding. So your job got more important. And I think it just got different, right? And so now as you're moving into, it's moving from kind of a job ticket taker, like, oh, go do this for me, to a system designer. And then more importantly, becoming a a product manager of your data product, and taking in all of those kind of soft skills into making sure people can get value from the data, right? But your job is going to remain pretty important in this explosion. I would argue even more important, but it is going to change.
That's true. Yeah, it changed a lot since the early days. That's absolutely true. Especially whenever it's a real that in the company there's a data science team or there's a data science use case where you're basically building the whole pipeline, you're building the whole project, and going towards self-service for the scientists, for instance, right?
Exactly.
Now, one thing, and I've been thinking about this before. How do you see this? How are people doing this without Airbyte? Like, what are people doing usually? The only thing, or really thing that I know, is building this from the ground up yourself, which is terrible. It was always terrible.
I mean, I can take you back to this picture, right? That's but no, I think more that it's what do people do without Airbyte? I mean, I think that is important to understand as these maturities evolve, and it is actually what you said. That's what we see as these use cases. You tackle these use cases, tools, including, I mean, anybody, and this includes Airbyte. Like I don't think we're any more special than anybody else in a way that if a company that's selling you kind of a pipeline management platform like we do doesn't have a connector for the data you're accessing, well, kind of too bad for you, and you're going to have to go back to what you did before you had the tool. And so that's what we've pictured in this kind of red area. And I think, just to point out that there are like hundreds of thousands of new APIs are being created all the time, every year. It's insane, the explosion here. Mm-hmm. You add unstructured data. I mean, everything we just said about the maturity graph. I'd say the rate of complexity because of those 4 dimensions is exploding, right? So that's a really scary area. And so what people do is they have to go back to the basics, and you can do as much as you can with a tool. That's great. 100% people should do that. There's lots of good tools out there, but you're still stuck writing code and building and kind of having to build a product layer shimming on top of all that. So hopefully that resonates with people who are doing this. They're living this every day.
I'm guessing people do this I see a lot of people are in the chat. Post a 1 in the chat if you're doing this right now. If you're writing code to do these in-house pipelines. But can you elaborate a bit more on where's Airbyte different? What makes it different from these other solutions? Do you have a bit more info?
So I think the way that we're different, there's a way that we're different and a way that we're not different. So we're not any better than anybody else in the sense that we can build connectors that we can build at the speed that any other vendor can build connectors. Like I'm not going to sit here in front of everybody and say, oh yeah, we can crank out connectors faster than anybody else. But we are different because our core is in open source. And so that means that we can be powered by the whole community, everybody on this stream right now. You can go in, you can download the open source product from our website, and you can just go build your own connector. And now, so I want to make a really important point here. We measure our success, our future success. In an ideal world, anybody using Airbyte will never have to write a custom pipeline. They might have to write a custom connector. But there is a world of difference between all the engineering that goes into managing pipelines and orchestrating tasks and governance and all that stuff. That's the stuff that you never think of the first time. You're like, okay, I'm gonna get my Python script going here and just get some data in there. Like, that works. But then you're stuck dealing with all those other things as time goes on. And so our measure of success is a world in which anybody who's using Airbyte doesn't have to write their own pipeline. They might have to write their own connector, and we are trying to do some things that I have on the slide here around making even that easier. But at the end of the day, you can always fall back in the fact that we're an open source, open standard, and you can write your own code.
Mm-hmm.
There are a couple things that we've done to make that easier for people who are not going to be great at coding and don't want to do that. So the first thing we have here on the slide is a marketplace. So the community, we have a huge community of people. They can contribute their own connector. And it goes through a little bit of a kind of quality and approval process on our end. And then there it is. It's available as if we wrote it. And again, that's massively powerful because we're a small company. And, we're trying to enable a massive community of people. So that accelerates people who are using Airbyte get the benefit and the power of that community of thousands of people. And then something we released in our 1.0, which was just a couple of weeks ago, is something we're calling the Connector Builder. Think of it as just a low-code, no-code way. We even have an AI assistant bot to help you get in the builder, help you kind of get started faster. So if you're connecting to a new API that you've never seen and no vendor has ever seen before, nobody in the community has ever seen it, it's an internal thing that was written at your company, something weird like that, you can just use the Connector Builder, and in minutes, you have a connector. Now, remember, Airbyte's never seen that API, right?
Yeah.
And you had to do something custom. But the data is flowing through our pipes. And so that means that you're getting all the benefits of the platform on the bottom of the slide.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So we're going to see, Was is later going to show us a few of these basically pipelines, right? Was?
Yeah, I'm chomping at the bit. I see some questions in the chat, and we're we can definitely cover those when we're hands-on in the platform. I think it'll make a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think so. I saw the one with ETL, ELT processes and real-time data in the ingestion. I think that's something for you in the hands-on part. Yep. Can we make it so I'm going to start these, so maybe we make sure that we don't forget.
Great.
These. Yeah. So is that the journey, John, that Airbyte basically went through? First, create the certified connectors or your own connectors, and then the marketplace, and now having the builder. Or what was the journey here along with Airbyte?
That's a great question. That essentially, yes. I mean, I can say one thing just to kind of talk about where we've ended up on that journey, which is the users of Airbyte. It is the largest data movement community that I know of. You can see some numbers here. The thing I would call people's attention to is the thousands of daily active users of our platform across all the ways people can use it. 900 code contributors. That means people contributing code that are not us, right? So you can see the power of that community base. Over 1,000 PRs merged from the community. So that's just showing, I think, the dynamism of that. It didn't start like that. It started before I joined. I joined in 2024. Before I joined, it was started just before COVID, 2020. And the way our founder Michelle likes to describe this is that it was started with 5 pretty terrible connectors. Just getting started, right? And a big vision. And over time, over the years, I'll build this out really quick. Raised a bunch of capital, tried to go wide on connectors, and starting to go, launching our cloud product, and a bunch of steps along the way. Everybody can read the slide. I think the big thing I'd say here is just the breadth, and then the depth being the thing that we were focusing on. Again, most of that was around 2 parts: the connectors we're building, and then exposing these CDKs to the world. But that was very much an engineering API, right? And so what we were missing was the less engineering and the less software engineering data engineer, a data analyst, and the self-serve type of persona, right? And so that's how, when we got to 1.0, we were really trying to tackle with the marketplace and the builder to enable all people in the self-serve world and in the GenAI world to interact with Airbyte. Mm. So that's how we got here. And it's been a long journey. It's been a lot of fun I know Wass has been here a little longer than I have, but even in the past 8 months, it's been quite a ride as we're going through this. It's been exciting to see the growth.
How can I see this? Like you mentioned building pipelines, right? Was in the beginning, was the focus more on just connectors and then later basically added the pipelines feature, or was that immediately like, okay, we want to have this completely?
Number one thing, that is a great question. The number one thing that the founders had in mind is the idea of an open platform for pipelines, right? And so to let you build a pluggable platform for connectors. But of course, you can't just release that and say, here you go, right? So you had to start it with some connectors. But I think that's why the joke is in-house that it was kind of like the first connectors were kind of okay. And that's because the vision was always about pipelines, right? And letting people, and the connectors, of course, are important. I mean, look, the reality is most, especially commercial interactions, people would like it to be a certified connector. But the hard truth is that nobody can predict the future of what connectors are needed. Nobody can see inside to all the first-party data silos. It's just an impossible problem to solve unless you take the approach we did, which is to focus on the open platform and all these different layers of ways to expose people to do it themselves.
I get it. But the one thing I think, because for me, when I looked at Airbyte initially, I was only seeing the connector topic. I wasn't seeing so much building the pipelines. I think that's also something you might need to work on the messaging, because you when you go to the website, like you immediately see, we have that many connectors and this. But I think this is more than just connecting to data sources, but then building the whole pipelines. That's that's something where I hope now people understand this better. Now that we're talking.
Yeah, that's great feedback, by the way. Thank you. Yeah. I will take that.
So huge community. You saw you showed the numbers. Can you go back to the numbers?
I sure can. Let me go back on my slide here.
Like these 7,000 users. So what, or these 900 code contributors? What are they doing? Like, are they building pipelines, or are they working on connectors? Like, how do you, like, what does this fit? How does this fit?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think most typically they're working on connectors, tweaking something, fixing a connector that's open source, saying, hey, I found something has evolved. Remember the 3 dimensions of the problem? Right? Something's changing and something needs to change in a connector, and they get to it before we do. Okay. We don't have that many people contributing to the platform piece because that's not where people, it's interesting your feedback about the messaging, right? Like the platform is the thing nobody wants to build. Right? That's what they're counting on us to do for them and make it a generic, like a meta platform. And I think we do get a couple in there. But the problem is that the platform needs to exist and needs to be generic and needs to have an open API, and once you have that, then it's about making sure that you're getting the breadth and the quality in each connector.
I mean, it's natural, right? People want to basically use Airbyte to solve a problem, and they don't want to work on the platform. They want to use the platform and be able to use the connectors to then build their pipeline. Okay, this is super interesting. I mean, with the community, a project lives or dies, right? And this is like
absolutely
really strong. You mentioned 1.0. Like, what is that all about? Like, can you give a bit more details? or 1.0?
Yeah, that was such an exciting moment for us at Airbyte. I'll say, one thing I'll say about 1.0 is we took it really seriously. Some people could say, oh, it's just a label, you slap it on, you say you're 1.0. That's not the approach we took. We really wanted to make sure we had a couple things, and I think it's getting to the question you were just asking in a way. Like, we want people to be able to use the platform, to rely on the platform. People don't want to have to go and muck with that's the whole point of what we're trying to do. And so we wanted to get the platform to a level where it was super easy to deploy. It could fit into the way people do things with CI/CD, etc. Or you could kind of configure it and manage it through APIs. And then you have to trust it. And I think this is maybe the point I want to hit for really hard. Everything I just said, since we started talking, the whole point of outsourcing to a tool, and again, open source, you don't have to pay us to outsource, you can just download it. But the whole point of kind of delegating that software engineering task is that let's kind of zoom way back out and ask ourselves, for the audience here, like, why would you do that? Well, I think it's super easy to understand when you say, if you got some data from a source and the data didn't make it to the destination for whatever your use case was, right? If it got dropped or it got transformed wrong, and I know there's questions about transforms and where do you do the transforms and all that, we'll get to that. But I just want to make the point that if you can't trust the pipe sending the water through your house, like, just to use that analogy, if there's a leak or if the water got polluted, then you're kind of in trouble and your job is on the line, right? And so I think that was a big thing for us. We really took that seriously from our community, is that we wanted to make sure that when we called it 1.0, we felt that people using Airbyte could say, okay, I'm going to focus on connectors, not pipelines.
It also sends a message, right? That we're here to stay. This is not some beta thing. You can trust us. We are going to be here for a long time. So if you're using our service, our tool, this is not going to go away in half a year and then you have some kind of a legacy thing that nobody's going to maintain. Right?
100%. And I think that's an important point too, is that we are here for the long haul. Yeah, 100%.
Nice. What do we want to do? Do we want to jump into a demo, exploring the capabilities? So we were talking about the marketplace and connector builder and so on.
I think so. Why don't I quickly introduce what we'll show and what's in 1.0, and then Was, you can take it away. How does that sound?
Great.
All right. So what did we actually release in 1.0? And one thing that's on this slide that we won't demo is the self-managed enterprise GA. And again, that was key to this reliability thing. We wanted to be able to meet organizations where they are. So I'll talk about that really quick, and then we'll demo some other stuff here. So just on self-managed enterprise, we wanted to make sure that with 1.0, we weren't just addressing kind of the smaller use cases. We wanted to go and make sure we could also address bigger companies, bigger, more complex organizations, some of those data silos, some of those moles in the picture that are really only ever found in large enterprises. We wanted to make sure we could get to those. And obviously then a big company that's going to buy a tool, they want to expect a level of support. So we had to do all that and prepare ourselves both technology-wise and organizationally for that. And that came as part of our 1.0 launch. And so Wasik, why don't you take over and you can...
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to start with just a quick slide that talks a bit about the platform at a high level and gives you a sense of how we back up that whack-a-mole kind of objective of being a platform that's, not only going to meet your needs, but also grow as your challenges as a data engineer increase, scope increase, the number of people you have to support increase, the number of data products your organization has to deliver on reliably increases. And, it comes back down to this slide, which honestly hasn't changed much since my time here, which I love.
Can you click slideshow? Maybe then
yeah,
I think that will get
let's
bigger.
do that, and I'll hop in and out. But yeah, and so ultimately it comes down to three kind of key benefits that you're going to get with Airbyte being an open source tool is control, extensibility, and community. And because we're open source and because Airbyte can be self-hosted, the ability to control kind of your most sensitive asset, which is your company's data, on premise or in your VPC, avoid getting pigeonholed into vendor lock-in scenarios. Airbyte's going to be able to give you a level of comfort and control with your data infrastructure that it's going to be really hard, if not impossible, to get with other closed source black box solutions out there. And so, and kind of the next two pieces around extensibility and community, they kind of go hand in hand because our community has driven us to do a lot of innovative things, but has ultimately been a kind of advocate for extensibility in the sense of having this platform meet them where they're at from a deployment standpoint, from a catalog standpoint, and kind of those benefits really come down to that bottom blue box, that data exchange protocol. That's what I like to call Airbyte's secret sauce, right? That is kind of fundamentally what does it mean to read data from a source, serialize it, process it, and write it to a destination and manage the accuracy, the typing, all that stuff throughout that process. And we refer to that internally, more colloquially as the Airbyte specification. So like, what does a source need to give you, give the protocol, and what does the protocol ultimately have to give to a destination? As long as you are building connectors on that specification, the catalog grows endlessly, effectively. And we've seen that, and that's how we have, over 350, I think it's probably close to 400 connectors, Airbyte connectors and marketplace connectors. But with some of the tools I'm going to show you around connector building, one of my favorite stats right now is that we have over 10,000 connectors built using our tools that we give developers. And so it just highlights how active the community is in trying to solve their own problems. And just because you build a connector using Airbyte doesn't mean you have to contribute it back. It's great if you do, but we provide a lot of control, extensibility to meet you where you're at. And so, and then talking about, and this is where I was hoping to see some of those questions, but talking about kind of the benefits you get with Airbyte, talking about connectors, talking about pipelines, right? One of the key benefits too that John's been talking about is like, if you use that Airbyte framework from a connector standpoint, you immediately get the platform benefits, right? And so Airbyte fundamentally is a Kubernetes-based data replication, data movement platform. We just happen to be really good at giving people tools to build connectors. But once you build a connector on our specification, it's in our catalog or it's a custom connector, you have access to the platform where we take care of scheduling, managing the configuration and state of those data pipelines. So you can do incremental syncing, so you can do different sync modes like deduplication, append, managing schema changes, automatically propagating changes in your schema to your destination. And operating that platform entirely through an API or through a Terraform provider if you want. I'm going to be doing a lot of UI driven work today. I'm going to do some API driven work today just to highlight some of that functionality. But keep in mind that we have a lot of folks who ultimately don't go in the UI. They config everything as code. They raise pull requests to create connectors and create more of a data mesh, data fabric product in their organization and serve data engineers as consumers of the platform. So where that topic of like building pipelines, I think as you progress through those stages of maturity in a data organization, you wind up more in that architecture mindset of like, how do I enable, teams of data engineers to, access data freely and securely throughout my organization. And those are the things that we like keep in our mind as guiding principles as we build things like our enterprise product. But
there was actually one question that fits to this. It was around workflow orchestration. Like, if a company has this now, or now starts using Airbyte, and they already have in their architecture, for instance, Airflow, right? Kubernetes you already mentioned. That's where this is basically built on and it's running on. But if they already have Airflow, can they use this for this?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we actually recommend it if you have, many dependencies outside of Airbyte. Like, it's highly recommended that you bring your own orchestration tool. Like, we can orchestrate based on frequency, but part of that extensibility is being fully activated by APIs. And so in my demo I'll actually do that. One of the questions I did want to talk about around hardening your deployment was we'll talk about compliance real quick and strategies to scale and high availability. That the topic of control, it's articulated here. We're going to go into our ABCTL tool, which is a quick start pre-packaged wrapper of the Airbyte deployment in Kubernetes. But when we talk about scaling and high availability of Airbyte, we have just platform software guiding principles of hardening your deployment in a Kubernetes based application. And so doing things like externalizing your configuration DB into like its own isolated Postgres instance, so it's resilient to things that may happen with pods, to isolating kind of components of the platform into workers, into the UI, into the platform. I'll actually just jump in real quick to give you a better.
That would be cool.
I need to share a different screen real quick though.
That's always something I'm looking forward as well. Like, okay, because there are people, okay, we're creating an ETL tool, for instance, right? And then you think about, okay, now how does this scale? This is just like, how does this scale?
Exactly.
And let me bring it in here.
Yeah, and it's a quick one. It's really just to show you kind of the options you have for deploying. On the left here, I have our quick start ABCTL. You can go to docs.airbyte.com, look for the quick start. It's going to show you how you can install Airbyte either locally or on a single node. I have it running on an EC2 here, just a single VM in AWS. But inside it, it's really just it's initialized on Docker, but it's really just a wrapper around actual Kubernetes pods. So I have my components of Airbyte, running jobs, hosting the web app, maintaining the server, all that good stuff. And on the right, I actually have my more enterprise Kubernetes, the full-fledged Kubernetes deployments. I'm using Helm directly to deploy and manage this. I have some like critical pieces of the infrastructure externalized, but underneath the hood, like, it's still our core open source tool. And you can really harden it into, a workhorse for production workloads by, throwing a bunch of resources at it. It scales really well horizontally because as jobs spin up, you're just, creating these single pods that run jobs and then have containers that run on them of your source of your destination and replicate data. So that's just a little peek behind the hood and how the sausage is made.
Is that basically what we see? Also, I see worker here. Is that what a worker then basically does? Then you would have multiple workers and they and then your jobs run there. Cool.
Yeah, and if you have auto scaling on, you'll just spin up more nodes. And it'll handle scale really well. And so if we jump back into the actual platform, I'm going to walk you through a couple things in this demonstration, but I have my ABCTL instance, right, hosted on a VM. I'm accessing it through the web. And it's, the first thing you're going to be presented with is is your workspace, and this is really a space where you go in and you create those configurations. You instantiate those connectors, create those pipelines, click sync. And so we'll just do that real quick. I've got a good demo here where you'll have to choose your connector. I'm going to do Salesforce, but just to give you an understanding of the Airbyte's catalog, we have this concept of Airbyte connectors, and then we have a concept of Marketplace. And so Marketplace is what we launched recently, where you can access community contributed connectors. We've added great tools to better understand the usage and success that the community is seeing with those connectors. And so we have guides here to show you on a scale of 1 to 3 how many people are using these connectors, how successful they are with those connectors, to guide you into the right direction as you start choosing connectors to either build to or may want to contribute to if it ultimately is a connector that you care about. And with Marketplace, you can actually pull these down and contribute to them directly into the builder, and we can talk about that a little bit later. But as far as like setting up that pipeline, right, for connectors like Salesforce, things that are not uncommon and actually really required across many organizations out there. Mm-hmm. It's as simple as just providing your application. I'm going to use a smaller start date just so that I can do small amounts of data. But Airbyte's connectors are templates that you effectively just pull off the shelf, instantiate, and then you can actually reuse them however you see fit. So previously you saw there was another connector I could have chosen to just like recreate another pipeline if I wanted to send it to a different destination or send it in a different way. It's really, highlighting that flexibility you have with the tool. These are configurations, you instantiate them, and you can, build kind of effectively like pipelines the way you would with Legos at that point. And so, great. And so just went through that authentication on Salesforce. Again, we're going to be presented now on the destination side what connectors we want to build. And sorry, I'm zoomed in a little bit, but it's a similar boat. We have our Airbyte connectors, and then we have our Marketplace connectors. The big ones on the Airbyte connector side are going to be things like BigQuery, Databricks, Snowflake, obviously, S3. We're supporting more and more of these vector databases, which we'll talk about in a second. But there's a lot of really popular destinations on the Marketplace side too. So like ClickHouse, StuffDB, Elasticsearch, all that stuff. For this demo, just for the sake of speed here, I'm going to go ahead and do my BigQuery. And this one doesn't play nice with my tool. So we'll pop that in. I need to have this set to my data is hosted in US West 2. So you got to post it to the right location. Let's go to this data set. And then let's, you have the option to choose different loading methods. There's going to be, configurations and parameters that are going to be specific to the source or destination that you're working with. Mm-hmm. And so, we need a service account key for BigQuery, for example. But, getting that stuff out of the way, it's going to do an authentication check, tell you if anything's misconfigured, but we passed all those checks. And now we're on to the pipeline stage. So this is where we're actually in the connection, source destination equals connection. And we're going to define a bunch of properties around how we want this data to be replicated. And so the first thing it's doing, it's discovering the data you have access to based on your credentials. So it was doing a discover on all the endpoints from Salesforce that my access token was able to hit, and is presenting them to me in a nice clean manner here where I can configure some things. And so, first it'll ask me what sync mode I want. There was a question about deduplication. This is where we're going to talk about that. By default, we're going to recommend folks do what's called replicating the source. That's going to run a single historical load based on that time box that I set, that start date. And then it's actually going to, in future syncs, after that initial sync, do smaller incremental loads and then run a deduplication process. So when, specifically with Salesforce, when data is deleted, when data is updated, we're going to pull through those primary keys and actually reconcile the latest value based on that key and the timestamp that we're tracking as our cursor. So let's put it into practice. Let's think opportunity, because my go-to-market team wants to know, how's our pipeline looking? We want to look at opportunities. We want to look at accounts. And we can, there's a lot of sources here, so we can do some nice filtering. And we want to do contacts too, make sure folks are generating new contacts at these organizations. And then I can toggle it just to show you what I've enabled only, get rid of everything else. Here's where you can be a bit more explicit with how you want each of these streams to be handled. And so streams are going to be synonymous with endpoints, but for each of them, you have the option to go in, take a look at the schema. You can even toggle specific columns to be withheld. Say there's particularly sensitive data, or you want to just for whatever reason reduce the size of the payload. You can actually filter that out within Airbyte. Right now, these are configured to that append and dedupe incremental sync method. And so it's going to be looking for only new data that has a new value for system mod timestamp, which is a cursor field for new data in Salesforce. And then each table has a source defined primary key ID. And so what's going to happen is we're going to replicate incremental data only, and then once that's done, propagate that or deduplicate that against that primary key and overwrite with those latest values.
So you mean with deduplicate is that it will, if the same data is there again, it will not basically override it or
basically
write it again. I mean, that's...
Yes. So when in those incremental syncs, we're actually going to use a filter when we request Salesforce for new data, saying, hey, Salesforce, only give me new data that has a system mod timestamp greater than the last time I synced the data. And it's going to go, great, here you go. And then once we deliver that data, we're actually going to look at, are there any duplicate primary keys? Are there any records that were updated or deleted? Are instances where that would happen? And then we'll actually deduplicate. We will retain the latest values and delete the old ones. We maintain an immutable internal table at the destination as well for record keeping, if you will. So you will have that data retained as well, to something to keep in mind. And you'll be able to see when data is deleted and when it's retained and all that good stuff. We were talking about incorporating orchestrators. This is where Airbyte supplies some basic orchestration capabilities, whether that's a frequency-based sync schedule or the ability to inject a cron string. But more commonly, and what we're going to do today is just provide a manual sync process. And this is going to allow me to externally reach Airbyte, reach this connection through an API call and make a request. Bunch of other stuff when it comes to data organization, like you can customize which data set or namespace, as we call it, that the data gets delivered to. You can prefix column names with particular strings. Some people do that to apply regular expression filter to look for data to automatically pull into like a sub-process or a post-process of the data, for example. We're just going to leave stuff as default right now. But the last thing I want to call it here is the ability to handle schema changes. So, every time we sync data, Airbyte's actually going to go back and run that discover process that we ran at the top of the sync and check for any diffs as it relates to, what schema have I been syncing versus what is the source presenting me with now. And we're going to be able to elegantly handle field changes. So simple column additions, column removals, we're going to handle those no problem. When it comes to databases, maybe even Salesforce, a lot of people will actually just want to automatically consume new tables as they become available. And so you can choose to propagate all field and stream changes in those cases as well. So if you just want to consume as it comes available, automatically don't go back in Airbyte and change things, you can do that. And then if you're more sensitive, if you're more sensitive to schema changes, don't anticipate them, you can set things to stop. You can set things to require approval. You can set to be notified. There's a whole notification panel in the settings page where you can do webhooks or email notifications for a variety of actions.
Okay, that is very helpful.
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
Yes. If something goes wrong with your data pipeline, we want to make sure that you at least are the first person to know about it and not someone who's consuming a dashboard and wondering why these numbers look off.
Yeah, I like the feature that you can actually stop it, right? So that it's not going to just write other stuff into your destination, but say, okay, whoops, something has happened. Before we continue, let's send this to somebody so that somebody can actually check.
Yeah,
that's good, because otherwise you may need to do some cleaning afterwards, and it's like, oh.
Exactly. And I want to be mindful of time, and so what I'll do is I was going to just ping this through an API to turn it on, but I got a notebook here, and we can figure out a way to share that stuff after, if folks want to do that. This is effectively how you would do orchestration. You just make a couple API requests, but we'll actually hop into scenarios where it's all fine and dandy, right? When you need a connector that's already in the catalog that everyone has, right? Salesforce. But what happens in the scenario where you need something that none of your vendors have, it's not in the marketplace, it's an internal API, there's no reason why anyone would have it, but it's a simple REST API, and you don't want to build it yourself. We have a couple of options, right? So if it's something like, what's great with marketplace, first of all, if there's like a marketplace connector that say just needs a new column or a new stream added to it, you can actually directly in the UI using our connector builder, which is, I don't want to rush over it, but effectively it's our latest iteration of connector building tools. It allows you to configure API requests and ultimately publish a connector directly from your workspace. You used to have to do it through a Python development kit. And so we've invested a lot in creating abstractions on top of that, to the point where we're at today, where folks can go in, they can pull an existing connector off the shelf and say, hey, I want to add a stream to AirCall, or I want to add a column type to AirCall. They can go ahead, pull it in, customize it for themselves, or customize it for the marketplace, publish it back, raise a pull request directly from the UI, or just keep it for themselves with those customizations. And so the marketplace is introducing this like very awesome level of community contribution and speed at development that really, really excites me. But one of the big announces we had with 1.0 in particular is the ability to, like, the story I tell with connectors and custom connectors is like, connectors are formulaic. They are, they follow patterns. They share common characteristics, and that's a great application to introduce AI tools. And so we actually introduced an AI assist where you can actually just point it to some documentation. I actually have a really good example here. I don't know if folks on the call watch like Rick and Morty, but there's a public Rick and Morty API that you can get a bunch of information about the television show. They got some documentation here. You can click to it. It's using GraphQL. You write queries, and then you can just give us that documentation. There's an endpoint in there called character. So all I have to do is just give it the documentation, point to that stream that I want, that let the AI do its thing. It's going into that documentation. It's, shoring up, hey, this is what the documentation looks like. This is what Airbyte typically does to build connectors. And it's going to give me kind of a jumping off point with a top level URL I can hit. What's nice about this one, it doesn't require authentication, but it'll do its best to, derive the type of authentication required. You can see here, this is our UI builder. And it's able to derive all this stuff automatically through the documentation, saying, oh, we want to make a GET request to the character endpoint, and then actually you can paginate. This is all, again, abstractions on top of the Python development kit. So there's little bits of Jinja in there that the AI wrote itself. And then you can just start doing tests in this interactive development environment we have here to start making requests to the API, look at the response, and then start massaging that output to the Airbyte specification, where then, once this looks good, I'm getting, 5 pages of 20 records. That looks about right. You have the option to add more streams. AI is going to go and detect other streams that I can add. So I could go click episodes if I want. I could publish this back to the marketplace, or just publish it directly to my workspace to use privately. And so I know it's a lot, but that's kind of the wow factor I wanted to introduce with our 1.0 is this bringing of AI into these scenarios that engineers commonly find themselves into, where it's great, I have all these connectors, but the team needs 5 more. How am I going to build those? And going back to what John was saying, never building custom pipelines. If you're building custom connectors, you can put them on an Airbyte pipeline, an Airbyte connection, and you're going to get all that benefit that I showed you previously around the platform itself.
Wow. I mean, that is really of course. Well, this is really straightforward because you already have a documentation for an API, and that documentation has all the methods that you do, has, as you said, has the information how you are going to authenticate and everything. So why not have this simply figure this out through pointing it to the documentation?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay.
And not to gloss over it, the tool is very powerful. And once you become a domain expert, if you will, in building connectors with Airbyte, you're going to see that we have a bunch of great prepackaged components of code. So there's a handful of most common ways to authenticate. We've prepackaged those here, and you just configure them. So this is that session token method of interacting with Airbyte's own API, for example, generating a session token. And then once you have that session token, you can go and make requests to get your jobs. And not only that, you can send filters to request only new data. And so, as we enhance that AI model, we're going to be able to do more and more of these components. The first iteration is just the basic assist. Let me, that's how I use AI today, mostly for my job, is just give me a template of code that I can start out with, and then I can do the rest myself. I can make it solve the purpose that I need from there.
I mean, is this already there, or will this come later? That when you say, okay, now I have created an API connector here, and I want to, like you showed with BigQuery, I want to write this into BigQuery that I can then see all the attributes, and that is this already there, that it knows the attributes, and then I can then select the attributes in my pipeline?
So part of this interactive development environment, it's going to be that schema discovery process as well. And so I'm running a pretty complicated request right now, so it's taking a second, but it's going to return a bunch of job data back. I can look at the raw response. Airbyte is going to automatically start defining that schema for you, and you can change this if you want. But for your APIs, it's going to be a pretty common pattern, and so you can just publish this and then make changes as you need, as I showed previously.
Andreas, and remember too, the whole point here is you're creating this connector. Once you've created the connector, you can use it in all sorts of different connections. It doesn't have anything to do with the destination for this source, right? You can put it to many different destinations. And for each time you set up a connection, you can pick which streams you want, etc.
Yeah, but what I mean is, because it already makes automatic schema recovery, or does schema recovery, you already know that when you select the destination, you already know the schema, and you don't need to go through and okay, how does this look like, and what do I want, and it's already there. Okay, that is pretty cool. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's Gingen. And so we talked a bit about transformations in the chat earlier. We don't do heavy Spark-based aggregations, transformations, things like that. We're very much a replication service right now, and that's something we have our eyes on in the future. But we do support the ability to do basic transformations. We talked about column selection earlier, but even here you can do basic column level transformation, inject a hash function using a Jinja template, so just injecting a little bit of Python that says, hey, hash this value to SHA-256 or something like that. we have that basic capability here. You can truncate things. You can massage data into a format you see fit using Python right in the tool itself.
Oh, okay. Let's. Do we want to talk quickly about use cases? I have that on the agenda, because one thing, like when you showed this, the first thought that I had was like, a lot of companies, what they do is they have somewhere their production system, and then they want to run analytics, and they, for instance, a lot of companies use BigQuery because it's so nice to actually put the data there and actually then through, for instance, Looker Studio, then analyze the data. And even though if they're, for instance, on AWS or they're on Azure. And so this is one of the use cases I would say that immediately came to my mind. But what else could be? Like,
yeah, I mean, I think there's so many use cases that you can use with a tool like this, right? I think people are doing that. They're doing just getting things. Snowflake is a very common destination we see where people want to get a bunch of raw data in there. To Was's point, we don't have to do much transformation, and a lot of times people want more of an ELT model, right? And so that's pretty common. Although we're seeing that change too as well with especially with AI and a lot of security concerns. But again, like back to those use cases, I think one of the core things we see is people wanting to do all this and build a kind of self-service experience for a whole number of use cases. Right? We're really an infrastructure layer that you can programmatically configure to solve several use cases at once.
Mm-hmm. All right. Yeah. So what else have we thought that we want to talk about today as well? You said with GenAI, there's also a big topic. Do we want to talk about this a bit?
Yeah, we get to that.
Yeah. And you mentioned when we first talked, you mentioned something like with the Datadog use case.
Yeah, we can talk about that too.
That was something.
We're happy to share what we're doing with Datadog. Happy to jump to GenAI, whatever. Those are kind of two different use cases. Datadog is self-service.
How much do we have on? We were talking about GenAI. That I found that really interesting.
Let's jump to GenAI.
Yeah, let's jump to GenAI.
That's probably the most interest in that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you want to set the stage, John, or should I just dive in?
Yeah.
Okay.
I have one slide to set the stage, Andreas. I think I'm sharing it.
Yeah.
If you want to give me the here. I think again, this is one of those use cases to your use case question that's much more recent. Wasn't really the top of mind when we founded the company, but it's amazing to see how the invariant of data and data in motion and everything. And by the way, like Was, it never gets old for me to watch that demo. It's just so cool.
Yeah.
It's so amazing. But just to bring that in, we have so many other ways of doing things. So GenAI, the problem space that we're most relevant for, that a lot of people will face, is the idea of first-party data, right? Your own internal data getting into an AI application, because the big public models were not trained on your private data. That's the fundamental problem, right? And so you can't run them. You can't say like, I'll go into one of the public models and say, hey, like how did my sales numbers look last month? Well, they'll have no idea, right? It might give you some strange answers. And so people need to solve that problem if they're going to use GenAI. And again, if you're going to do something with GenAI, I just want to bring people back to this because the demo Was showed it just really hits this home. If you're in the business, if you end up in that fourth dimension of creating your own pipelines, it's even worse when you're doing a GenAI use case, because if something happened to your data, the GenAI is not going to know, right? It's just going to give you an answer. And your answer is probably wrong, and probably really bad things happen downstream from that. Right? So the importance of having trusted pipes for your data I would say is a factor of 1,000 for when you're doing GenAI, because there's no human in the loop. So that's kind of the problem space we think we're fitting in, is kind of being that invariant of getting the right data into your GenAI application. And when it's your first party data, people will do RAG. They'll do all sorts of different kind of architectures to solve these things. We are really agnostic to that. We try to solve all of them. So I think Wasp maybe you can show us a little RAG demo. But remember, for everything,
that sounds interesting.
It's not like we are a RAG tool.
I think it really goes back to this slide, and I'll just do it real quick again, because like the extensibility and the community benefits you're going to get with Airbyte are how we've landed in position today, where I'm going to walk through how you can use Airbyte to build a RAG application for your LLMs. And the problem, exactly what John was saying, is like, it's one thing to utilize these LLMs. It's another thing to apply it in the context that your organization wants to take advantage of it, and that it requires your own first party data. And inherently, we're back to like the value proposition of like, I need data from A to B, because you're using Airbyte and because we invest in extensibility, we solve that in a couple different ways out of the box. Like, one in what's very exciting, and we'll go through it in the demos. Like we released a whole new kind of instantiation of Airbyte called PyAirbyte, which is a Python-based library of Airbyte connectors that you can run in any Python context. And so, meeting developers, AI developers, where they're at, because we find that the way companies are approaching this is typically with maybe smaller tiger teams, people who weren't necessarily data engineers to begin with, but have been tasked, have become de facto data engineers because they've been tasked with creating these solutions internally. Giving a user to invoke Airbyte in those contexts is like going to get them off the ground much quicker, and we'll show you exactly how. And then secondarily, like it's being community driven keeps us on the forefront of innovation, and that's, as a result, how we've been able to support a large number of these, newer vector databases. These databases that store the data in kind of the vectorized format. Sorry for the jargon, but that is required in order for these large language models to actually take advantage of that data. And so, with our 1.0 launch, we actually released a YouTube video walking through this notebook. This notebook is actually publicly available on our website today. So if you go to our website and look for the 1.0 launch materials, or we can post this YouTube link in the channel to watch kind of one of our lead AI engineers, AJ, talk through this in more detail. But
send it to me in the private chat here in our tool, then, because I think I'm the only one who can post it here on YouTube. Okay. Otherwise it gets blocked.
Just shared it with you there. And so what we did is just create an out of the box AI chatbot, and it's using the RAG methodology. And so in here, you'll get some basic definitions of what these things are. I know this is like a space to be learning, and these are all newer concepts. So I'm definitely not an AI expert, but I know enough of this stuff to talk about where Airbyte fits in. But effectively, in this notebook, you'd build it in a different context, but you very well will be building it in Python. What we're going to do is introduce a model where you can pull data from a source, in this case GitHub, store it into a local cache, chunk that data, vectorize it, load it into PG Vector. That's one of our newer vector databases, and then have some scripts that operate as an AI chat that can then take your questions, translate those into vectors, and then look those up in your vector database before actually providing you with the answer to the question around like, how are these issues in my repo looking? And so the idea is the chatbot's going to help you discover information or news or insights about the issues that people are raising in your GitHub repository. And so we'll skip through some of the prereqs. I already ran this, so I'll talk through the code mostly. But introducing the source, I have a screenshot of the UI because I think it just helps set the stage of like what's actually happening under the hood. Is instead of defining all this stuff in the UI, you're actually just going to be defining it through a GitHub Airbyte connector. And so once you import the Airbyte library, you can define a source for GitHub, provide the configurations that you would normally provide to the UI, right? The repository you want to hit, your personal access token, which you can store in a Colab notebook. I think this is pretty sweet, honestly. And then the streams that you want to replicate. And so it's going back through that process of utilizing Airbyte to communicate with that source based on that Airbyte specification and pull the data down. And then we have DuckDB just storing that data in a cache here. And so it's just overwriting the data in the cache. And then similarly, from the connection standpoint, you now have to publish that data to your vector database where it can be accessible in that vector format, chunked and embedded to your liking for your model based on the context of how you want it to be answering those questions. And so similarly, we have on the destination side our Airbyte connector for PG Vector. The config is a little more complicated because we're communicating with a database and we're also defining things like indexing and embedding and all that stuff. But this is information on how to communicate with that destination, where to embed the data, how to vectorize it, all that good stuff. You can click run, and then one of the reasons you can use other caches if you want. We'll talk about that in a second, actually. But we like DuckDB because it gives a nice little user interface. I can actually see the sync running right as it replicates data. These records are going to go up, indicating that it's loading these successfully into that PG database, that Postgres database, which is again external of this notebook. So there is data being loaded to a database. And then it comes down to the actual application itself. You have to build that chatbot. Our foundational guide is just around 3 basic functions to be able to take a question, turn it into numeric representation of that question into vectors, and then actually have another function that takes those text chunks and gets related text chunks from the vector DB related to that topic. So it's kind of like finding relevant things that are needed in the context of the question that the user is asking. And then lastly, it's like putting a bow on it, right? So like have a process that actually runs a query to your LLM saying, hey, here's the question, here's the vectors, here are the vectors related to that from the Postgres database. Give me a recommendation. So I already ran a couple of these, but so like, for example, it's like, what new features do users want from Postgres? Well, it turns that into vectors, and then it will ultimately look for those in that PG database where I loaded all those data, all that data already. And then it's going to find the relevant chunks. So in a similar context, it's going to take that question, actually pull it down from the database. These are all the issues that I pulled from Postgres that are now in my Postgres PG vector database. The issues related to the topic. What new features do users want from Postgres? Great. But we're not building a search engine. We're building a chatbot. We wanted to make a recommendation. So lastly, we tie it all together where we're actually calling that large language model, instructing it, hey, you're an AI assistant. Find the best answer, synthesize it. Here are all the context based on what the user is asking. And so defining those questions here and then packaging it up into a nice little feature where you can drop down and say, okay, what new features have users requested for Postgres? It's going to run. It's going to do all of those context gathering. And then it's going to tell you, hey, people have requested the addition of Postgres as a source in Airbyte and linked it to the actual issue. So it sifted through those things. We can also do it for HubSpot. These are just some prepackaged ones, but you can imagine a scenario where you're just passing data to the chatbot, asking questions, and then it's looking that data up in a large data set of vectorized data. As a recap, it's like it's very much like, if you don't have data, you can't do AI, right? And so it's like, how do you not just get the right data? How do you get it in the right context? Like, there's solutions out there where you can, do these embeddings, these chunkings, these vectors yourself. The benefit with Airbyte is you're going to not have to manage that stuff yourself. You're going to have access to that platform. You're going to have access to all the benefits of running your pipelines on that platform. We'll handle the incremental loading, the deduplication, all that good stuff. And you just get to focus on deriving value from your chatbot, from building tools that are going to be meaningful for your organization.
Nice. Wow. That seemed really simple.
Yes, and
like only a few lines of code. Like it's not super.
Yeah,
super
especially
large,
for like the folks here who want to learn more about AI. Like, this is a really great spot to like learn about some of these core concepts as it relates to AI and in relation to this RAG. So RAG stands for Retrieval Augmented Generation. Generative AI. It's basically adding this component of retrieving data that you want to augment your response with before you generate a response back to the user. It's just like the idea of introducing your own first-party data to the context of these chatbots.
Yeah, I mean, and a lot of companies have that problem. They don't want to share their private company data with like companies like OpenAI or something, right? The data needs to be internal, and you need to have a tool for that. So you need to build something. Okay. John said he needs to leave in a few minutes. So how can we do this? My suggestion was, because there are a few really technical questions, I think, there. Can we, because John is the specialist for the product, like, can we talk about basically how Airbyte is, or what products Airbyte has, and get into the actual, how do you say this? The actual offers, exactly, the actual offers. And then afterwards, maybe we too can tackle a few of these questions that are there, because I don't want to leave these people hanging. There are a few really cool things, and John can, if he needs to, can drop off.
Great.
Awesome. I have a quick slide on our offers.
Okay.
If you want to give me the screen share back, it's pretty simple. And I will try to get out of my next thing, so maybe I'll come back. So just a quick thing for everybody. We do remember our foundation is open source, right? So you can always get our product open source. It's available. We do have our cloud product. It's up on the cloud. It's mostly targeted at kind of smaller teams, single users. Mm-hmm. We have a larger team version of our cloud product that we call Teams. It's also hosted in our cloud, but it has more kind of organizational features, kind of taking you towards enterprise. And then enterprise is our self-managed, much more complex organizations will want to use that. Has a bunch more features. So you can think of it as, again, for everybody here, especially if you want to get started, I would definitely encourage you, like, first of all, you can get a free trial on cloud if you want to do that, but you can also just always go and get started with the open source product. It's a lot of fun.
Cool. I always say to people, just if there's a free tier, use the cloud version, because you don't have to think about how to set it up and so on. Just you can start immediately, try it out, and it's really cool that you're supporting an open source version, and that people can use that, and then move towards enterprise, which, like we've seen with the RAG example, at some point you need, in a larger corporation, they need to have this on-premise is the wrong word, but like self-managed, right?
Absolutely.
It's really cool. Should people actually get in touch if somebody is looking for the right side of this chart? Like, who should they get in touch with?
Yeah. There's some links there. I also, Andreas added a link to join our Slack community. So if folks want to join our public Slack, you can go and you can look for WAS in there. But if you're interested in the particular offerings that John just mentioned there, we have some good QR codes for you.
Okay. Yeah. I posted it in the chat on YouTube. LinkedIn doesn't work, but YouTube, everybody on YouTube says, so join the Airbyte Slack. I recommend
please. You can find me in there.
All right. So let's jump into a few questions. Do you want to go in order or?
Yeah, we go top down. I know LinkedIn user, thank you very much for your engaged and thoughtful questions. And so I want to make sure we go and answer all the ones we can. So we'll start at the top, but he had a question around, how does Airbyte facilitate compliance with data governance, policies, regulations like PI mitigation, integration, all that good stuff. Yeah. So, one of the foundational principles of GDPR is minimizing data. And we talked about a couple of those out of the box functionalities with Airbyte. I think it comes to a couple components, right? There's that control aspect, that ability to isolate data movement within your own network, within your own VPC, preventing highly sensitive data from exiting your system and touching other third parties that don't have approval or could introduce additional risk. We are introducing more and more capabilities on the connection level to be able to. One of the things I demonstrated in the demo is like column selection, so you can withhold data that's not necessary to replicate. Something we've actually introduced more recently into some of our other offerings is the ability to mask with a hash value sensitive data, so you can still have that represented and brought through, and kind of like a one-way locking of that data to the destination. We are going to be introducing encryption as well, so the ability to lock and unlock once data has made its way to the destination. And there was another question that's in a similar topic that I know that they asked around, how do you secure data in transit and at rest? And one of the important things to keep in mind is that Airbyte doesn't store any of your actual customer data. We just store configurations, what the sources are, destinations, where our cursor is, access tokens, which you can bring your own secret manager if you wanted to. Even in the open source instance, you can bring your own secret manager. But yeah, we don't store any data. It's all ephemeral pods that spin up and spin down on Kubernetes. And so as soon as your job is done, the data no longer exists in the Airbyte platform. And that's true of self-managed, open source, and even the cloud tool. So we take that stuff very seriously.
Okay. I think there was also with real-time data ingestion.
Yes, yeah.
How does Airbyte support real-time data ingestion? What are the latency implications for streaming large volumes of data?
Oh, nice. I see you have the questions get up there. Nice.
Yeah.
This is a really good question. At the end of the day, Airbyte is a replication tool. And so we're not a streaming service. And so as a result, what you can expect when you replicate data with Airbyte is that there is an initial instantiation of creating a pod, spinning up the containers to communicate with the source and the destination, and then micro batch processing that data from source to destination. And so for very low latent requirements, like we probably would recommend a more dedicated streaming service for the time being. But if you can live with 30, 15, 10-minute sync intervals, depending on your data volume, even less, higher frequency, then Airbyte should still be considered as a part of your stack.
John said, John, you need to go?
No, I got out of my next thing, so I'm good.
Oh, okay, you get out of it. Okay.
He loves talking to the community.
That's nice. So What was it? Okay, one thing, I think this one we already answered a bit, like can you discuss Airbyte's capabilities in managing complex data transformations and mapping more data transformations? You said you're not doing that much, right?
Yeah, not today. And I think like that's, we are slowly but surely introducing kind of E little t, LT. So, historically, since our, early on, we've very much been EL, and then T would be done either through DBT or some sort of other tool at your destination. But with ultimately the requirements to have data be kind of massaged in a certain way, or, we were talking about security and compliance, like those are just fact of life, hard requirements that data engineers have to be able to move their data across these systems. And so we're introducing transformations that are going to enable that. We are working with more systems that do kind of the big T transformation, the Spark-based Iceberg, Databricks, all that as a destination. But yeah, John, I don't know if you have more of a philosophy on the big T stuff down the road.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of ways we could go. I mean, we on this, to talk about this, we could talk about what people are doing now. We've talked about a little bit our roadmap. I think a lot of times people will use, if they're moving data to a warehouse and more of the self-serve and kind of core reporting stages and use cases, people will use tools like DBT to do transformations. And again, I think that's more of the shift in the industry towards get the raw data into a warehouse and kind of do all the compute there. That's a pretty standard pattern. I think, and I'm sorry, when I stepped out for a sec, I think there was a question about streaming coming along too. But I do think that a lot of this stuff will converge. I think that's kind of how Airbyte sees it, where moving data, transforming a little bit, a lot, depends on the use case and what you're going to do with the data. But a lot of the things that we were showing, they're kind of the wow factors in what we do, kind of are orthogonal to whether you did a transformation or not, right? The managing the schema and managing the change and all those moles that are popping up in 4 dimensions, like that's all kind of independent of that. And where I think a lot of the core problem is, or the pain is, so we do see ourselves moving more towards doing things optionally in movement. And I think it also depends on where you're moving to and what you're planning on doing with the data when it gets there. So that's what I'd say about it. Like we started introducing things. I think you saw some of it in the demo where you can do things like basic hashing. Those are transformations that would go against the pure religion of ELT. But
I mean, from my side, I actually like that it doesn't have that, because I always feel like people want the do-it-all tool. This needs to do everything, and then it does nothing really well.
Correct.
Right. So although people may think we want to have super complex transformations there, but then this will become a huge pain of actually solving the problem, the initial problem, moving data from here to there, and then later in an ELT fashion, then later transform it. So I actually like that it's really straightforward, and you have the connectors, you can create your pipeline, done.
So totally, and I think that's where the industry evolved over years, right? Where people started with tools that were ETL, and ELT really took over. I think it gets more interesting, Andreas, when you're getting into what I think some people call like reverse ETL. There's lots of like there are times when you are going to have to do things like that. When you saw RAG, etc., that the data does need to change when you're going that way. And from the nice thing about a tool like ours is that we don't care whether your source is the source with a capital S or if it's a midpoint along the way. Right. And so I think that's the thing that we see, is that think of it as like in pure worlds of networking and compute and storage, right? We're the network layer. And that's the thing that's hard. It's not only hard because you have sources trying to go to a central warehouse. It's hard because moving data is hard.
That's true.
And so that's why we're saying this. That we really view that these tools will consolidate. I totally agree with your point that we don't want to do too many things, right? You want to do the right amount of things.
Yeah.
But because on the right of a picture like that, where you're getting from a million sources and you're going to like tens of things in the middle, and then you're going from those tens of things maybe back to hundreds of things on the right. I'm drawing a picture with my hands.
I do this all the time. I understand.
I think once you see that as the movement problem, then we see movement as the thing. Data in motion. I think there was a question on the chat too about like, do we persist the data? Like, we don't do that, right? We're think of it as like a pipe.
Yeah.
We are moving the data. We're trying to move it really well. Sometimes my joke around it is that the small T on transformation, we should say it with a whisper, right? It's like ELT, but you whisper a T kind of between the E and the L. Sometimes you need to do that. And sometimes you need to do it because where the data is going doesn't have a T.
Can also be, yeah. That's true. What else was there? There was something with GDPR and HIPAA.
Yeah.
I always try to dance around these topics.
California laws too.
How does Airbyte facilitate compliance with data governance policies and regulations such as GDPR, CCPA? I actually don't know them, and HIPAA during data migration integration. Yeah. What do you say about that, John?
I think there's a couple levels I'd say there. So again, remember, we aren't storing the data, right? So that makes everything a lot easier. We are also able to run that's one of the reasons we have a self-managed enterprise thing. So we don't have, sometimes people have very sensitive data that's regulated. They don't want it to come into our cloud. So just on that, a roadmap thing that we've been talking a lot about with the product managers on my team is this idea of splitting our control plane and the data planes in Airbyte. That's part of the architecture that Was was showing you. The fact that eventually some people might want that. They might want to be able to kind of have the Airbyte control plane hosted in the cloud, but still not have data leave their infrastructure. That's the direction we're heading in. Even hybrid versions of that, where some data can go into our cloud and some, because I think you made this point, Andreas, earlier, is that like managing something yourself comes at a cost, right? So if you can get somebody to do it in their cloud, great, but sometimes you can't for these reasons. And then the last thing I'll say on this, and Was, you might want to add as well, is the data itself. It's one of the reasons we added the whispered T, right? Is that sometimes even from the source just to a warehouse, you don't want PII showing up on the other side. So you want to remove columns, or you want to do something to hash them, or you want to do stuff like that. That's again a reason why you wouldn't just blindly copy everything, especially if you're going to an AI. I mean, if you're going to an AI destination and somebody's social security number or whatever ended up in there, I mean, you don't want the AI tool to be like, well, thank you for asking about so security number. Here you go.
That's horrible. That's true.
So.
But I mean, that point with, and I can see that because I was in the same situation, that when you struggle, it's like we in EU, we have the GDPR, right? So when you are struggling with GDPR topics, try to do it in-house, try to have a self-managed system, because this you can actually manage and you can audit very easily.
100%.
And that's why I think it's really cool that you have the enterprise version where you can like bring this into the larger companies. There was one other thing that also scratched me is how does Airbyte handle error tracking, logging, alerting? Can it integrate with existing monitoring solutions like Prometheus and Grafana? Let's keep it more general. Like we were talking about, okay, you can send events out through email or something, but like, can you also like how is this done? What are the options?
Yeah, absolutely. Am I okay? Cool. I'm not on mute. I can even share my screen if there's time. Let me just get the right pieces up. We were talking about erroring, logging. Yeah, this is the one thing that I was a little worried about time, so I kind of glossed over. But we'll go back and look at that Salesforce BigQuery sync and just talk a bit about where we go from there. So let me just share I'm in Chrome for this. Screen share window.
That's the bonus for everybody.
Yeah, exactly. For all the people who are staying late to hang out, like this is the extra credit. So okay, great. You've initiated sync. You'll see that on your timeline. You'll get a sense of how much data was moved. If there's any issues that come up, you'll be notified visually on the screen, but you'll also have the ability to set notifications at the platform level, at the workspace level, for a variety of conditions, and those can either come through. Those are going to come through webhooks. When we're talking about our community edition, you have the ability to do email-based alerting for the cloud and the other one. But because it's open source, we keep it just more secure for you guys, and so largely based on a condition, you can have it, most likely just go ping either a PagerDuty or a Slack channel, set up a Zap to have it alert you otherwise. The logging itself is all contained in the sync logs. So when you run a sync, I mentioned previously that what's actually happening under the hood is there's a pod spinning up with a couple containers on it, a source, a destination, and a replication container. And those three containers are going to be talking with each other, sharing resources of that pod to read data from a source, replicate it, write it to the destination, that Airbyte specification I was talking about earlier. And it's visually represented in the logs here. So you can see all of these containers working alongside with one another. If there are issues that come up during the sync, you're going to get like a really robust level of detail through here. We'll also provide just like a top level error output if there was some sort of error up here. But while we're replicating data, we are doing a bunch of data validation as it relates to like, are we writing as much data as we're reading more explicitly? Like we're doing checksums on each batch of data we read and then each batch of data we write to make sure that there's, equal parts coming in and going out of the replication job itself. And so that's a bit as it relates to just logging and resiliency there. If you take a look at the output, we can hop into BigQuery and take a look at some of the additional data points you're going to get when using Airbyte that will handle like row level, record level errors. There's a lot of constraints both in your source and your destination that aren't always going to line up. A really good example is I think Redshift has like a really small record limit, a couple megabytes. I forget exactly what. I think BigQuery it's a little bigger. Snowflake might be 16 megabytes, but we work with people who have really large records, and so some records are just ginormous blobs of JSON or some other kind of unrestricted text. And so if we ever kind of run out of available kind of storage for a given record, we're actually going to gracefully handle that, truncate it, and then supply details in this Airbyte meta column. So this is an Airbyte supplied column that will indicate if there's any record level errors that came up. So it's really good as a consumer of this data to have a condition on this to track if there's any issues that came up during the sync that would cause a record to be redacted partially.
Mm-hmm.
The questions then are around like observability and like the I forget the expression, just like the hosting visibility, OTel, I think open telemetry protocol. That is supported not necessarily out of the box, and it's more relevant in the context of hosting Airbyte. So I brought up that screen previously of my deployment. Like you could actually absolutely hook Airbyte, your deployment, your self-managed deployment, into those logs to trigger things like, hey, these pods are dying because of out of memory. You can use more traditional OTel to manage your actual deployment itself. But if you're using cloud, that's nothing you have to worry about. So,
okay.
All right. I think that got at most of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, there's additional data in here too as it relates to generation IDs. So we watermark your data with like a rough period of time or collection, if you will. So if you ever do a full backfill or a full truncate and reload of your data, we're going to tick up that generation ID just so that you know that like, hey, this is on generation 1, your data down there is on generation 0. Just a heads up, like these things should match. Otherwise, we could have removed some data during the truncate process, things like that.
Okay. Nice. All right, guys. I had a few other questions, but I think one thing that I wanted to ask. Let me ask one thing. I was thinking like, where do you see now the future of Airbyte? Have we talked about this? We already.
Yeah, we talked a little bit. I'm happy to talk some more where we think we're going.
And I think that would be a nice ending. Like to talk about where is this heading? What do you have on your timeline? Like what do you see?
Yeah, maybe let me see if I can reshare. Because I did prepare a little slide on this.
Okay.
Can you see this?
Yep.
I can't see it anymore. Okay, now I can see it and you can see it.
No, we can't see it anymore.
Oh, you can't see it now?
No, it's gone. It's gone. You need to share it again.
Okay, unshared. Weird. How's that?
Oh, it's back.
It's back. Great. So this question came up a little earlier too. We kind of started talking about it, streaming, and we've talked a lot about kind of ETL, ELT, and AI. Right now we are, as Waz said, we are not a streaming tool, and we don't yet do what some people call reverse ETL, or we've been calling internally data activation. But that in the market, what we think is going to happen is that people will want not necessarily a single vendor all the time, but certainly a single approach and standard. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the thing that I want to say here is that there's a difference between wanting movement to be a thing and a protocol for movement versus always having to have a single vendor supply all your connectors, for example. Right. And so we do think that will evolve, or just by this little animated slide. And what that means for us very concretely on our roadmap is we are gonna get into more of these use cases. Some of it is very basic on just core basic movement. Wasp was hitting on some of this right now around the data and filtering and encryption and lineage of the data and moving to raw files, FTP. Because because that's still movement of data, right? You still have to get it from A to B, and somebody wants to control that.
True.
All the way onto the right around doing some of the things that you saw with Airbyte, chunking and integrating into catalogs of observability, the questions that came up. And most importantly, I think the thing I would call your attention to here is activation. Right? That people don't always want to just move data from a source to a place where they're going to look at it and just look at it and look at it. Sometimes they need it to go back into systems of operational control and after it's been processed. Always in AI. GenAI is definitely part of that. But sometimes you need it back into your supply chain management software or whatever it is where the data needs to go. And so we do think that movement as a capability and as a protocol, things like, let me figure out what your schema is, did it change? Everything we just talked to you about today is going to be the thing that people will standardize on, right? Oh, did your schema change? Well, you want to know that from the source? You might also want to know it from the middle part if you're going to push the data into some system of operational execution. Right? Did the data in the warehouse change? Did its schema change? So that same problem is a problem. So I don't know if it's some of this is visionary, where we think it's going to go, but I would leave that with everybody here to think of movement as a piece of core infrastructure, core capability.
True. Nice. Yeah, I can see this. All right. That was a real nice ending to this very informative stream. I mean, wow. So I learned a lot. I hope you guys all learned a lot and are going to watch this if somebody needed to quit in between, because we were literally going 1 hour 45 minutes. So it's really, that's why I love these streams, because we have the time. We don't need to rush through stuff. We can actually get to the bottom of it. And yeah, so go check out Airbyte, everybody. I'm going to, should we, let's stay with there. Everybody check out Airbyte, get in touch with Woz or John, join the Slack. I posted on YouTube the Slack in the chat, and I'm also going to post it again as a comment afterwards. Thanks everybody, and we see each other in the next stream. Woz and John, please stay with me for a sec after we ended the stream, and then yeah, thanks again.
Thanks everybody. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very. Yeah. Thanks for the engagement. It was great.
Yeah, great questions.
Really, yeah, that's really good questions. So, bye guys.